I will say, though, my first pick that I used that first pick on last week was Oklahoma. And I'm not mad about that.
Oh, man.
Outcome. I mean, wow.
Fired the OC,
something.
Seth Luttrell, gone.
Mm-hmm.
And former Mizzou tight ends coach Joe John Finley, now the OC there. How about that?
You know, and I don't know if that's going to improve the state of things. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But as the Missouri game was going on, you can see those out-of-town scoreboard updates come across the wire, and you're going, I don't really have time emotionally to think about this right now, but does that say 32-9 South Carolina over Oklahoma?
Yeah.
They were smoking them, and I couldn't really enjoy it as it was happening because I was watching in front of my face some crazy things happening on Faurot Field, all of which ended in a favorable fashion. But, yeah, it just didn't give me the chance to really soak that in while South Carolina was beating up on OU. But like I said, I picked OU. That's one that I'm okay with sacrificing in the picks of the week.
Well, and it might also lend into the conversation we're about to have next here on the Big Show. 875-KTGR if you want to call or text us. What is Mizzou's path to the playoff now after their win against Auburn, 21-17? And here's the thing, Brenden. I said this after the A&M game, and understandably, no one wanted to listen to it because, look, they lost the way that they did against A&M. Let's not talk about the playoff. Don't talk about that right now. We need to talk about this team.
That's how I felt.
How they suck right now. And it was true, right? At that point, yes, they did.
Yes, but it was more about they have to focus inward and improve their state of play, or we're wasting our time with playoff talks. Exactly. That was kind of where I was. But no, you continue because you had some valid points.
I said after the A&M game, I don't see this team getting into the playoff without a win against Alabama. And 2 weeks later, I think that's still true. I think it's almost confirmed like that. I think they need to win this weekend in order to get into the playoff. Because, look, you could potentially, I guess, get in at 10-2, but if a 10-2 without an Alabama win is your resume, and your best win is either Vanderbilt or at South Carolina, which one of those two teams might have a number next to their name by the end of the season, but I don't think that's a guarantee, and I don't think it's really impressing too many people. But now, after you're seeing what happened this past weekend, Alabama lost, Georgia beat Texas, so now Texas has a loss. There are a lot more possible 10-2 teams in the SEC that if they do end up going 10-2, a lot of them will have better resumes than Mizzou's 10-2 that includes an Alabama loss. They're just plain and simple. So I think they have to get in at 11-1 if they want to have a real shot at this, because after Alabama's loss, it's a crushing loss. I think that is one that Mizzou fans needed to see happen. They needed to see Alabama go and win that game. Because Alabama, if you beat Alabama this weekend even, they're 3 losses, and now that might be spiral territory. Because they'll definitely be out after 3 losses. They play LSU next. That might be a 4th loss in Baton Rouge. And then, right, everyone loses motivation on that team, and they start to spiral. And then at the end of the season, everyone's looking at Mizzou's Alabama win on the road, and they're like, okay, it's tough at Alabama, never easy, but is it really all that impressive compared to what other SEC teams have done? No, it's not. So I think it has to happen. I think they have to win this game this weekend in order to have a legitimate shot at the playoff.
Yeah, because if this was a bad weekend for Missouri in the games that they didn't participate.
Yeah.
Not just the Tennessee-Alabama outcome, which effectively takes an Alabama team that you get to play, so thereby, if you beat them, you have a leg up on them anyway. They didn't need to lose to somebody else for you to have the leg up on Alabama. And now Tennessee has new life again, whereas you kind of thought, okay, Alabama favored over Tennessee. Tennessee loses. That's their second loss, and their first one wasn't great, and they almost lost to Florida. They would be dealing with some of those same image problems as Missouri, and ultimately Tennessee wins, and then Texas can't get the win over Georgia. So instead of Georgia having a real look at 9-3, Georgia could very well go 11-1. At minimum, they're going to go 10-2. and Georgia's getting in over you at 10-2. Tennessee's getting over you at 10-2, and they can still lose again to be at 10-2. LSU has a schedule that, I mean, they might run the table, but let's say they drop one, their 10-2 is going to look better than yours with some of the teams that they play.
Yep.
And the way, their loss right now comes against USC, which was not a 31-point loss like Mizzou had against A&M. And then there's A&M at the top of the conference as well, sitting 6-1, and they'd have to lose multiple times. Even Texas A&M at 9-3 would be going, you saw what we did against Missouri. I know that Missouri's 10-2, but do they even have an argument over us? 10-2 is bleak. I mean, you would almost need Vanderbilt to go 9-3 and be ranked in the top 20. You would need a lot of teams to lose that probably aren't going to lose those sorts of games. It would have to be all-out chaos. And it feels like it has been chaos, but there might not be enough chaos in the world for a 10-2 Mizzou to get in.
You had a little bit of chaos this weekend, but it was not the right kind of chaos. I
agree.
Because
not for Missouri.
No other teams, you needed a few teams that are playing unranked opponents to take a loss here and there. Would have been nice to see Louisville get it done against Miami in that absolutely bonkers game.
It's not just your conference.
Right?
It's those teams that are now still spick and span, like Miami, that, gosh, there was a world in which they have 2 losses, maybe 3 at this point, and they don't. Miami's going to Indiana
coming up with a Big Ten.
Nebraska.
Right? Yeah.
I think of what we gave out on our rooting guide Friday, I don't think one of those things happened.
Not a single thing happened. No. Not a single thing. And there's still, I believe, BYU's still undefeated in the Big 12. You need that conference to be a one-bid conference.
Yeah,
so you got to have a few of those teams take at least one loss, and then it makes it a little easier for it to be a one-bid league. ACC's probably going to have both Clemson and Miami. So there's that there. Notre Dame is going to need to take at least one more loss. A lot of things still need to happen, and there's a little more than a month left. I think it could, but again,
a lot of stuff will happen. But
we're talking about levels of chaos that match almost what 2007 was. That's what.
Yeah, and you need specific chaos if you're Missouri at that point. And so
and then you need
beat
to
Alabama, and then
right.
You're worthy of being discussed if you beat Alabama. That's the thing.
So.
You just find your signature win. Because, Oklahoma, that isn't one anymore.
Nope.
I said it before the season that Oklahoma's biggest game, making sure they don't trip up and lose to Houston, because otherwise they may not make a bowl. Oklahoma is still in a spot where they may not make a bowl, though. After losing to South Carolina, they're real lucky they beat Auburn a few weeks ago. Auburn had them on the ropes. Oklahoma's welcome to the SEC. We tried to tell you that it was going to be this way. I know Missouri is not necessarily in the greatest of positions themselves at this point. And look, they're going to settle that on the field November 9th, and then one side will get to talk, at least about that matchup. But that's not a win that Missouri can hang its hat on anymore. South Carolina, dangerously close to being that, but they couldn't finish against Alabama. And they've got 3 losses at this point. So how impressive is a South Carolina on the road anyway? It's going to be a hard game. I don't know if Mizzou's going to be favored in the game, but it's just not going to have the cachet. Really nothing has the cachet other than at Bama, and even that one has taken a bit of a dip. So I'm not worried at 11-1. I'm not even going to invite that conversation. Just go handle your business, and that can work itself out. But you got to beat Alabama to be even part of this discussion anymore.
875-KTGR if you want to call or text us. Bryce texted in kind of the same thing we're talking about. Went out the only way in. Because, yes, I do think you're in at 11-1. There could even be the argument, though. Because the thing is, if they make it to 11-1, I think they'll be one of only 2 or 3 SEC teams that are even there with only 1 loss at the end. But there could even be an argument that a 10-2 Georgia has a better resume than an 11-1 Mizzou. Right? There's an argument there. So, again, you're going to have to...
You have to beat Alabama.
You have to beat Alabama. And then if you don't, then 3 teams of these 4, LSU, Georgia, Tennessee, and Texas, have to take 2 losses the rest of the way. At least 2.
And they don't play the teams to take those losses.
Right. They don't play any of those teams, right?
And Mizzou in that world could still rally and go 10-2 and be proud of its season. If you're talking about the playoff thing, which maybe is a moot point, but if you want to talk about the playoff thing, beat Alabama. I think that they are in position to understand that it's not really about what happens outside, though. It's just, hey, go beat Alabama. Go quiet the detractors. Go show what kind of team you are. As far as our belief in whether or not that's possible, I don't know. It's going to be a long week of talking about this game, but I will say, man, the way they did it on Saturday showed me something. Not because they beat Auburn by 30 and like, oh, they're better than we thought. No, they did it in a way that shows that they're not going to back down again. They're not going to be rattled again. They're rattled at Texas A&M. They got rattled that day by circumstances that they felt were outside of their control, and there was a little bit of, this isn't fair, woe is us, and they just kind of laid down after the referees interjected into that game. I don't think that Missouri is going to do that again the rest of the season because of what I saw them do, and now we know they're capable of it. That changes the perspective I had on this Alabama game because of how it unfolded on Saturday.
You're going to have to hope that this is the game that Mizzou just won against Auburn. You're going to have to hope that was the Kentucky game last year.
Yeah.
They go down early. A big play brings them back. They're able to find their way back, and they won a little more convincingly in that contest than they did in this one. But similar circumstances, right? Things are looking very bleak after a certain play late in the game, and they're unable to. A different team probably is unable to recover from it. But this team, and namely the quarterback Brady Cook, was able to inject enough life into the building in order to propel them forward. So, I mean, I agree with you. I would not expect them to put up the same type of performance that they did against Texas A&M. I can't really see that right now. It's not saying that they'll win, but it'll be a competitive game. And we'll just see if they're able to make enough plays to get it done. I'm not sure how they'll match up, whether they certainly don't have the same type of talent that Alabama has, but now, again, that Bama team, sure, they might think that their backs are against the wall and now is the time to start to run the table themselves and they'll probably get in the playoff, or is it the other way? Who knows?
If they already feel like they're done, you might see that play out. And look, here's what I would say. They were up for that Georgia game. Alabama, that was like their first real game, their first real test, and they got up for it. They almost coughed it away. We know that game was just unbelievable on both sides. Alabama wins that game. Since then, what does Alabama look like that suggests you can't go and play on the same field as Alabama
this year? Not looked
the
same. Nope.
They lost to Vanderbilt, but that was at Vandy. And they obviously just lost at Tennessee. South Carolina had them on the ropes in Tuscaloosa. South Carolina might be a better team than Missouri. I don't know. But it's possible. This Alabama team, by the time this game is played, it will have been about a month since they've really looked like anything. Since they've looked impenetrable, like they did in the first half against Georgia. Missouri's going to go in there with a purpose. This offense for Alabama is not, they scored 17 points in their last game. There are ways that if Missouri plays its A game, look, I compare it now to, if we're talking about, hey, what's it kind of like from last year? This is going to Athens, playing your A game as Missouri did, but they made one mistake in that game, and they weren't able to win it. You have to go play that same game on Saturday, not make the mistake, and find a way to win that game, and that's what this season requires. Last year, if there had been a 12-team playoff, Missouri would have been in. This year, because of the circumstances, requires you to go and actually win that Georgia game. You have to win this Alabama game.
Yeah. I think you're right. 875-KTGR. Call or text us. Daniel texted in. As of right now, Alabama is a must-win. With that being said, I truly think we'll take our terrible experience in Aggieland and play much better in this game, especially with the crowd noise. This is probably the biggest stage for Luther also, and I expect him to have a big game.
What do you think about that? Because, look, we're talking a lot of favorable things. Luther Burden, that was a tough moment.
That moment,
but
for
it's
sure.
Also
yes.
The punt that gets muffed and it goes for a touchdown. He comes back, what was it, 4th and 18. He had the reception.
Right.
I didn't like that he ran backwards to try and do more than he needed to do.
Yeah.
Didn't like that. But comes up with moments throughout the rest of that game. But, like, if you just look at Luther Burden's season at this point, we're waiting for that. Hey, against the best competition, here's Luther Burden putting the team on his back. And granted, you got to have a quarterback that can get you the football to be able to do that. I understand all those things. I think that this season, if it's going to be magical, still could be, it needs Luther Burden to elevate to that level, which is not very, maybe a fair, reasonable ask that you would make of very many players. But knowing what he is to the program and knowing what he's billed to be, I think, yeah, man, there's no better stage than Tuscaloosa for Luther Burden to say, I'm the guy everybody says I am, and here I am to show it.
Here's the thing. He's got to touch the ball at least 10 times against Alabama. He's got to. Like, the Mizzou's coaching staff has to make sure that happens. I do not know why they waited so long to use Luther Burden in the first half on Saturday. They ran something like 30 plays before he touched the ball. I
mean, I can tell you Kirby Moore had a really bad game.
I think you're right.
He had a bad game, Andy.
It worked out very well for him. That's for sure.
When you have everything thrown at you that you didn't expect Brady Cook to not be available to you, you maybe need to change things on the fly. But that should involve more Luther Burden, not less, right? And
especially with Nate Noel hurt again, and it was a different injury than what he suffered against UMass too. So.
And that's going to be an issue. But you know what? That's just kind of been a trend now. Where a few games, you go, all right, Nate Noel, it is what it is. Next man up, running back room. Let's just see what it looks like. Offensive line's going to have to block really well. I still think they could run the ball well if the O-line gives them the push. They've got talented running backs. But yeah, it was just it boggles the mind that Luther wasn't more involved. And I'll put a little bit on Luther because you got to get open, you got to do things. But when the offense is desperate for a big play, manufacturing those touches has to be part of the game plan for Kirby Moore in this offense.
Yeah, because when you talk about the number of playmakers that Mizzou has that can affect the game against Alabama's defense, which, look, they have not looked great on the offensive side, but the defense, still very good. So very good Alabama defense. And there aren't too many guys, talent-wise, that can compete with that type of unit other than Luther Burden, in my opinion. So that's the guy that you got to run through some way, somehow.
And then you spend the whole week going, hey, defensive secondary from Missouri, Ryan Williams.
Yeah.
Don't let that guy run by you.
No.
Because if these other receivers for these and tight ends and these random guys for these other teams that have gotten behind the Missouri defense this year have been able to do it, I can think of a guy on Alabama who's going to be able to do it. They're going to have to play their A game. But I was very impressed by largely the way the defense played. So, again, in very many facets of the game, they showed me things on Saturday that said, you could tell me the number is 100 going into Alabama. You could tell me the spread's 100. I think Missouri's going to show up to play the game. And they got to be prepared, though. This has to be their best week of practice of the season. We don't really always talk about that because we don't get to see it. But don't you think they have to absolutely, I mean, there's a one-track mind. There's a singular purpose and focus the whole week in practice, because on game day, that's what it's going to have taken to be able to get where they want to go here.
Got Rob holding here on the KTGR hotline. Rob, what you got?
Brady Cook. It was heroic. I'm glad I was in the stands. I've been involved with sports all my life. The young man brought me to tears Saturday. People need to get off that young man's back, support him. He won that game despite poor play calling. I don't want to really rail on people, but that young man pulled that game off. And I do agree with y'all, to make the playoffs, they're going to have to run the table, and they should have to. You don't want to back into the playoffs playing the way they have been. Maybe they run the table and we're all excited about it. But there's one thing about it. Brady Cook can hold his head up, and I'll be a fan for the rest of that young man's life or mine. That was special to see. I'm glad I was in the stadium.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to put it, about as good of a way to sum it up. And appreciate the call, Rob, here on the Big Show KTGR, because every single Mizzou fan should be 100%, 1,000% proud of what Brady Cook did for your team, because it's his team too, and he did whatever it needed to get it done.
I mean, we may never see anything like that again. You know what I'm saying? Think about all the circumstances that go into that. Guy talks about how much he loves Mizzou. He's loved Mizzou since he was a kid. All he ever wanted to do was be the quarterback for this team. And that comes with, a certain responsibility, of course. But I think probably when he was dreaming of it as a kid, he didn't envision if that should come to fruition and that dream should be realized, that he would probably have to deal with the degree of vitriol, like that not everybody would be on his side. And look, I do think there's a difference between vitriol that's out there and pointing out things that he pointed out post-game, that he hasn't played his best this year and hasn't gone the way that he wanted it to. But if Saturday showed us anything, it's that, hey, he's looking to execute every play, whether or not he does the rest of the way. I think we get on the bus, man. You just recognize that this is the guy that's going to take you. If it's going anywhere, this is the guy that's taking you there. He just proved it. He just showed that that's what it's going to be. So it's either going to happen or it's not, but might as well get on board because it could be something special still yet to come.
We shout out the training staff, by the way. Hats off to those folks. And then the folks
Incredible.
over at MU Healthcare, like I assume that's the hospital they went to right across the street, get the MRI done, get them back into the game. Those are the unsung heroes right there. About that.
Yeah, and Brady didn't seem to, they were asked, how'd you get back in this game? And he said, a lot of stuff happened. He didn't want to have to detail, look at me, I'm the hero. I did. But we can all see what happened. So we don't need to know every grisly detail. But it was incredibly unlikely, certainly a painful injury, and for him to come back, not only do it, but then play well enough to basically have the playbook at their disposal. Like, again, didn't love the play calling in the game, didn't love it certainly before Brady came back in, but just certain elements of scrambling for first downs when they absolutely needed him to. 2-point conversion, allowing his mobility to still be part of the game plan. Like, how do you think those conversations went? Like, hey, Brady, do you just need to probably stand in the pocket and throw? He's like, nope, let's just play football. You know what I mean? Like, just,
man,
it boggles the mind. We will never see anything like that with all the circumstances that were baked in, knowing how much Mizzou means to him and knowing how much it's been, not always an easy journey, knowing that there are folks out there that maybe wanted to see him fail. Again, I'd like to think that's not the case. I'd like to think that most of the criticism has been merit-based and say, hey, he's just not playing well, would like to see him play better. But he showed you he's the guy. He's the C, he's the one, and Missouri's going to go as far this year as he's going to take them, and that could still be very far. This thing is still on the table, but the circumstances are such now that we know you got to beat Alabama. You just got to find a way.
875-KTGR if you want to call or text us. Let's go to Kevin now on the KTGR hotline. Kevin, what you got?
Hey, what's up, guys? Long time no see with you guys.
Yeah.
I listen, I agree with you. Brady Cook, what he did, you can just tell the love for the school, and he's always been that way, right? I mean, he wanted to be here since he was a little kid, so, it definitely means something to him. I could also tell you, he's the guy because when Pine went in, we saw what that was, so it's a little bit easier to be like, yep, he's the guy. Yep, he sure is. So we can get on board with that. They're going to have to beat Alabama. They got to go in there. They got to get a signature win, man. I mean, if you're going to go into this environment and beat a team like that, now would be the time, right? Now, and not just for this season. I think, honestly, man, for Eli Drinkwitz and the program, for him to be able to say, yeah, my program went in to a hostile environment, one of the toughest places to play, and we won. He can hold that on his chip. He can put that on his resume, if you will, right? And then the last thing for me is, and they were talking about early in the season, the thing that's kind of getting to me is, and I don't lay this at the foot of Luther Burden III or even Brady Cook. To me, this is with the OC. I feel like we're still calling plays and we're playing like we have the same team as last year, like we have Cody Schrader, and we don't. All you heard in the preseason, it wasn't anything to do with the running game. It was about, man, this receiver room. It wasn't just about with Luther Burden III. It was Weiss. It was Cooper. It was Blood. It was Johnson. It was Norfleet. It was the amount of weapons that you had in the passing game that you should have in the passing game, and those guys don't even get out on the field. Johnson's the fastest dude on our team. You can't find a way to use him, to get him the ball quick, to get him the ball in space, or to send him down the field, at least to open up the rest of the middle of the field, because people will have to respect his speed. Like, none of those plays are being called, and I don't get that. So I think for me, as much as people want to come on Brady Cook, I just can't, because I think the play calling, particularly with the receiver room that we have and with the playmakers that they have, not just Luther Burden III, but all the ones that I named, they're not being used, and I don't get why. So, like I said, but they got to figure out a way to get a win in Alabama, man. Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate the call, Kevin, here on the Big Show. I think several good points. I will offer the one caveat. Marquise Johnson, I think, was banged up for this game, so I don't know if I saw him out there or anything like that. So that's the only one. But, again, the point still stands. Like, there are playmakers in this wide receiver room. Yes, it is on them to get open at times, and there have been, I think, issues with that this year, but Luther Burden's not the only talented receiver on this team. There are other guys that you can utilize. Josh Manning came up in some big spots yesterday on kick return, had a good catch too. Mookie Cooper, of course, Weiss had some good catches. I do agree that maybe they shouldn't. I think most of it is on the offensive line, though. They don't have the same offensive line that they had last year. Maybe that's the issue, is that they're calling it as if, Javon Foster and Xavier Delgado was still on that left side, and it wasn't Marcus Bryant and Caden Green. But that's the only thing I could really attain from that.
I mean, I'm caught between looking at Burden's numbers sometimes going, I said after that muff punt, like, his season's been a disappointment to this point. But I don't think he wears every bit of that when you do realize play caller's got to put him in a position to thrive. Quarterback's got to put him in a position to thrive. Offensive line's got to protect the quarterback to put Luther Burden in a position to thrive. It's incumbent upon everybody, and I feel like that's been the theme for several weeks. Like, everybody's got to be a little bit better and be on their A game to be able to pick up the teammate that might have a play where it doesn't go as well. The hope is that the guy who is an All-American level talent can emerge and do that despite some of the things that have the circumstances that have not been ideal. But it's not just him. It's got to be everybody. You don't beat Alabama with one guy. So I'm from every single entity that has been mentioned, and maybe we should say Kirby Moore's name again, has to figure out a way to, with the tools at his disposal, come up with a game plan that integrates Luther Burden a bunch, but also takes advantage of the notion that Alabama's going to know they're going to try to integrate Luther Burden a bunch and be creative with the ways that you get the ball to the other players when you do.
And look, it won't be easy. I mean, Alabama's defense, again, hard to figure out, hard to game plan against. But this is the week that Kirby Moore has to have it all put together, or have something effective against this team, because now's the time to determine what this season is going to be for Mizzou. You're going to take it to new heights, or is it can still be a good season, but it's not going to be playoff worthy if you don't get this one, in my opinion.